My name's Justin. I'm 27, and I'm the kind of guy who usually loves road trips. I've done the East Coast twice and took a solo drive from Texas to Colorado last year just for fun. I enjoy the freedom, the open road, the playlists that get better the longer I'm alone, and the weird little towns I stumble into. But I'll be honest with you, ever since what happened on my last trip, I haven't gotten behind the wheel for more than a few miles at a time. This happened in October of last year. I was driving from Chicago to Seattle, mostly to visit a friend, but also because I just needed to clear my head. Work had been stressful, my relationship had just ended, and I figured some long highway hours and a few cheap motels would be the fix. I planned a route that avoided major highways for most of the drive, more scenic, fewer tolls, and honestly, I liked the quiet. By the third night, I was in the middle of Idaho, some remote stretch between small towns, where the roads get real dark and cell phone signal just disappears like it never existed. I had about 2 hours of driving left that evening before I planned to check into a roadside motel I had bookmarked. It was a little past 10 p.m. when I stopped at this sketchy gas station off Route 95. The sign outside was half lit, and only one pump seemed to work. But I needed gas, and I had to pee bad. Inside, there was a man behind the counter, watching something on a tiny TV bolted to the wall. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. As I left the bathroom and grabbed a water and some gum, I noticed a guy outside leaning against the side of the building. Middle-aged maybe, long grayish beard, and a camo jacket. He was smoking something, probably a cigarette, but he was watching me. I paid quickly and walked back to my car. Just as I got in, the guy walked over and knocked on my passenger window. I cracked it just a little. "Hey, man," he said, with smiling. "You headed west?" I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, kind of." He gestured down the road. "My truck died a few miles back. Batter is dead. Any chance you could give me a lift to the next town?" Something about the way he asked, so casual, like he'd done this before, put me off. I told him I was actually turning north soon, which was a lie. He nodded like he didn't really believe me, but didn't push it. I drove off fast, heart ticking a little harder than it should have. Maybe he was harmless, but something in his tone had set me off. 20 minutes later, I was on a completely empty stretch of road, flanked by trees on both sides, when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. It was weird, because I hadn't seen another car since leaving the gas station. And these headlights were coming up fast. I moved over slightly, letting them pass, but they didn't. Instead, the car stayed behind me, pacing me exactly. I got nervous and tapped my brakes lightly to see if they'd back off. They didn't. That's when I remembered something. Back at the station, there was a tan Chevy Suburban parked in the far corner of the lot. It wasn't running, and I hadn't seen anyone inside it. But now I was sure this was the same vehicle. The car suddenly sped up and pulled alongside me, just long enough for me to glance over and catch a face in the passenger seat, bearded in a camo jacket. It was him. I hit the gas, pushing my little Civic faster than it probably wanted to go. But so did they. I couldn't outrun them. The road was too narrow and twisty. Then they flashed their brights and pulled back behind me. I realized then they were trying to scare me, maybe even force me off the road. That's when I remembered the last major town I had passed, about 30 miles back. If they had followed me from there, this wasn't random. I did something risky. At the next dirt turnout, I slammed my brakes and turned off the road. I pulled behind a cluster of trees, killed my lights, and turned off the engine. My heart was hammering as I watched their headlights drive right past me. I waited. After a few minutes, I started the car again and drove slowly back the way I came, keeping my lights off for as long as I dared. I figured I'd find another road or double back to the highway. But then, about 10 minutes later, they were behind me again. They had turned around. I panicked and did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. No signal. I kept driving until I saw a green highway sign. Rest stop to 2 miles. It was a long shot, but maybe someone would be there. Maybe a trucker, maybe even an officer. I pulled into the rest stop with no real plan other than making noise and drawing attention. To my surprise, a state patrol car was parked near the entrance, lights off but definitely occupied. I drove up fast and practically threw myself out of the car, waving my arms and shouting. The officer stepped out immediately, one hand on his holster. I explained everything in about 10 frantic seconds, and to his credit, he didn't brush it off. He told me to get in his car and stay low. We waited. A minute later, that Suburban rolled slowly into the lot. As soon as they saw the cruiser, they tried to back out, but it was too late. The officer stepped out, drew his weapon, and ordered them to stop. They didn't. They reversed hard, fishtailing toward the exit, but another cruiser had pulled in behind them, responding to the call. The Suburban slammed into a concrete pole, trying to turn around, and both men were dragged out moments later. Turns out, they had been targeting drivers at rural gas stations for weeks. Mostly solo travelers, stealing cars and belongings, sometimes worse. There were open cases from Nevada and Montana linking back to them. They hadn't picked me randomly. One of them had seen me post a location-tagged road trip photo earlier that day. They'd been waiting. I don't post trip photos anymore. I don't take the back roads, and I haven't done a long solo drive since. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that rest stop had been empty, or if that officer had taken a little longer to believe me. And I think about the guy's face, how calm he looked when he asked for a ride, like he'd done it before, like he planned to do it again. In 2018, my husband and I took a long road trip from Seattle to Yellowstone. We had planned the drive in segments, stopping at small towns, scenic parks, and hiking trails along the way. It was something we dreamed about for years, one last big trip before we started trying for a family. The scenery was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and for the first several days, it felt like everything was going our way. We were halfway through Idaho, driving along a quiet forested highway when I saw the sign, Rest Area 1 mile. Perfect timing. We'd been in the car for hours, and my legs were cramping. I had to use the bathroom, and my husband, Brian, needed to stretch. The highway had narrowed by then. No lights, barely any shoulder. The pine trees pressed in close on both sides, tall and thick, their branches arching over the road like a tunnel. Cell reception had dropped off a while ago. I remember thinking how peaceful it was until we pulled into the rest area. It was completely deserted. There was one small building that housed the restrooms and 2 battered picnic tables near the edge of the lot. No vending machines, no signs of maintenance, no cars, and strangely, no sounds. Not even birdsong or the rustle of wind through the trees. Brian stayed in the car scrolling through photos while I made my way to the restroom. I didn't want to be gone long. Something about the silence was pressing on me. As I walked, I had that weird sensation you sometimes get in deep woods, like the trees were leaning in, watching. The kind of silence that feels thick and unnatural. The kind that makes you whisper instead of speak. The restroom was dimly lit, the kind of harsh fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly, like it was on its last legs. The mirror above the sinks was cracked. The place smelled like mold and bleach, though it looked surprisingly clean. I picked the last stall in the row and shut the door. I had barely sat down when I heard it, whistling. A slow, tuneless melody, not cheerful, more like someone absent-mindedly whistling in the dark. Low, breathy, and chilling. Then came footsteps measured, soft, dragging just slightly like a boot or heavy shoes scraping the ground. I froze. Every instinct in my body told me to be silent. The footsteps entered the bathroom. They paused at the doorway. Then they moved again, slowly, methodically, passing by each stall. I pulled my feet up onto the toilet and tried not to breathe. My heart thudded so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. I pressed my hands over my mouth and stared at the floor. The footsteps reached my stall, then stopped. A long shadow fell under the door. Whoever it was didn't say a word. They just stood there, breathing. And then the whistling resumed softly, barely audible, and the footsteps began to retreat, one slow drag at a time. After what felt like forever, the door creaked open and closed. But I didn't move, not for 5 more minutes. I sat there with my hands shaking and sweat trickling down my spine, listening to the silence stretch on. When I finally dared to push the door open, the restroom appeared empty. I rushed out, washed my hands in seconds flat, and bolted toward the car. Brian looked confused when I got in and locked the doors.
"What's wrong?"
he asked. I told him. Every word. He turned pale and slowly shook his head.
"I didn't see anyone go in or out,"
he said quietly.
"I was watching the building. I didn't take my eyes off it."
I told him I wasn't imagining it. I was sure someone had been in there. We pulled out of the lot, the tension in the car thick. As we turned back onto the highway, our headlights swept the tree line. And that's when we saw him. A figure, standing at the edge of the forest. Tall, thin, wearing a long dark coat that reached almost to his ankles. He was facing us, but his face was obscured by shadows. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, half hidden between the trunks. Brian pressed the gas without a word. We didn't talk for the next hour. Later that night, in the safety of a well-lit motel, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was hiking and decided to rest. Maybe it was a drifter. Maybe I imagined more than what was real. But Brian's face told me he didn't believe that either. He saw him. He felt it too. We avoided rest stops for the rest of the trip, took turns keeping watch at gas stations, and we never spoke about it again. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had coughed, or sneezed, or opened that stall door. This happened 2 years ago when my friend Eli and I took a cross-country road trip after graduating college. We'd planned it for months, New York to California, just the two of us, taking turns driving, crashing at motels, or sleeping in the car when we had to. Everything went smoothly for the first week. We had fun, took photos, and stopped at weird roadside attractions. We even made a playlist that we joked would be the soundtrack to our adventure. But something happened in New Mexico that still messes with my head. We were driving through the desert, somewhere past Gallup. It was past midnight, and the road was completely empty. Just us, headlights, and open highway. The air felt unusually still, and I remember being struck by how dark the night felt, like the stars weren't quite enough to illuminate the sky. Eli was asleep in the passenger seat, snoring softly, and I was wired on Red Bull and blasting music to keep myself awake. There was this eerie sense of isolation, as if we were the only two people left on Earth. That's when I saw her. A woman, walking along the shoulder. She was barefoot, wearing a white dress that was tattered and dirty. Her long hair was matted and blowing across her face. I slowed down out of instinct. She looked like she needed help. I figured maybe she'd broken down or been in some kind of accident. But something about her made me feel cold all of a sudden, like a switch had flipped. A deep unease settled in my chest. I rolled down the window as I crept up beside her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't look at me. She kept walking. I pulled ahead and stopped the car. That's when Eli stirred awake. I told him I saw a woman walking, and was going to see if she needed help. He looked freaked out immediately. "Dude, don't get out. Seriously, just drive." But I was already stepping onto the pavement. The desert was dead silent, windless. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I turned back in the direction we came. She was gone. There was nothing but highway. I walked a few feet back, shining my phone light. Nothing. No woman. No footprints in the dust. Just darkness. The light barely stretched far beyond the beam, and every shadow seemed to breathe. I called out, but the sound just disappeared into the void. I got back in the car, visibly shaken. Eli kept asking if I was messing with him, but I wasn't. I swore she was there. We argued for a bit, but eventually he could tell I wasn't lying. He shut up and stared out the window, just as creeped out. We kept driving. About 20 minutes later, still reeling and silent, we passed an old gas station. Deserted. I slowed down out of curiosity. The place lit by a single flickering light. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, overgrown weeds reclaiming the concrete. I was about to speed up again when Eli gasped, "Holy shut, Nathan, look." She was standing at the edge of the lot. Same woman, same white dress, bare feet. But this time she was facing us, head tilted slightly. Her face was wrong, not distorted, not bloody, just off. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, mouth slightly parted, like she was trying to remember how to smile. I slammed the gas. Tires squealed. The speedometer climbed. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. We didn't speak until we hit Arizona. Even then, it was just whispers. Like we were afraid she'd hear us if we spoke too loud. Later, we stopped at a 24-hour diner. We were both too wired to sleep. Eli looked up stories about that stretch of road. Turns out that exact spot just outside Gallup is considered haunted. Multiple reports of a woman appearing at night, usually to lone drivers. Most of them say she disappears when approached. A few say she gets in the car. There's even an urban legend that if she does get in, she won't let you leave the desert. I still have no explanation. I know what I saw twice. I don't talk about it much anymore. Most people laugh or think I was sleep-deprived or hallucinating, but Eli saw her too. That second time, we both did. And I won't drive through New Mexico at night ever again.